Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Reed Stone. Alongside me is my co-host, Bob Foley. And our guest for this episode is Dr. James Gambone. Jim wrote his first book titled ReFirement, A Boomer's Guide to Life After 50, about 20 years ago, long before the topic of planning for life in retirement was being talked about. Now in its sixth printing under the title Refire Your Life, the book continues to inspire people to take a deeper look at what it means to participate in the longevity revolution. He recently collaborated with two financial advisors on incorporating many of the refirement concepts for financial advisors and their clients. They combined to write a book, Join the Longevity Revolution, to highlight these concepts. For those viewers, you may recognize the title of that book because Bob and I have had the co-authors of that book, John Comer and Bradley Jensen, on previous episodes. Jim prides himself on being a living model of what it means to have a successful multi-portfolio career, being actively engaged in the work he loves long after a typical retirement age. As he points out, why should I stop doing something that provides meaning and happiness in my life? As a social entrepreneur and business owner for more than 30 years, he has been a published author of a number of books, an educator, speaker, workshop leader, consultant, and media producer. Dr. Gambone is a part-time graduate professor of public health, teaching online for the past 11 years, and he is a respected expert and keynote speaker nationally and internationally on generational and intergenerational relationships. He has also been an award-winning multimedia writer, producer, director, and distributor for over 30 years. And his most recent production, The Life and Loves of Sinclair Lewis, is streaming on the Sinclair Lewis Foundation website. You can learn more about Jim and his multi-portfolio career and interest at pointsofviewinc.com. And just as we've done in previous episodes, we will share Jim's contact information at the end of the show. Jim, thank you for joining us today. I know it's been a long road to get here, so welcome.
Thanks, Reed. It's really fun to be here, and I also want to congratulate you and you and Bob on the work that you're doing right now to help promote other people to become more aware of what they can do with this gift of longevity that we've been given.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim. I want to jump in and there's a couple of lines in the bio as I was putting your bio together that struck me as points that I think should be noted. And the first one was your point about why should I stop doing something that provides meaning and happiness in my life? And then the other point that I pulled out was the part in your bio about creating and living a life and being a living model about having a successful multi-portfolio career with multiple interests and being actively engaged in the work that you love long after a typical retirement age. Bob and I have talked about this many times, and we see and work with many more examples of people today who are coming to these kind of same conclusions that I think you came to 20 years ago, again, really before this topic of retirement. And I think longevity is really bringing the topic of retirement much more to the forefront, and people are thinking about it more. So I just wanted to start with kind of a two-part question is, why did you decide back at this time to build your life and construct it this way instead of taking probably what you were seeing from friends and family members and colleagues who are taking a more traditional retirement? And then how did you come to realize that this was kind of the best way for you personally to create this, and I'll call it a retirement portfolio?
These are good questions, and actually it goes back a little bit before I wrote ReFirement, and in 50, I think it was 50, when I was 55, I started writing it when I was 53. I was involved in college in the civil rights movement. I was a member of the Peace Corps in my early 20s. and as a professional educator. All of these things sort of convinced me that there wasn't a traditional route to retirement as we know it. It just wasn't going to work for me. So I knew that part of my life very early was to dedicate my life to service, looking for justice, if you will. And there just weren't a lot of traditional job descriptions out there in the job market that I could pick and try to fulfill that. So basically what that called for me to do was try to create my own career path. And what I quickly realized, because I have a lot of different interests, it wasn't a career path, but it was a number of areas of career involvement. And I remember when I first started in business, I was able to get some help from a retired marketing executive from Control Data. And he sat down with me as part of the senior advising program for young business people that were starting their businesses. And he sat there for 4 hours listening to all the things that I wanted to do with my business. And he said, well, I'm going to tell you there's two things you got to learn about doing business. One, you have to keep two checkbooks, one for your personal life and one for your business life. And then you should find a good lawyer and accountant that you can work with. Those are my two pieces of advice. And he said, for you, he said, I wouldn't think about doing this time. I was looking at my media career part that I was involved with. He said, I wouldn't look at one part of that. He said, you could be a producer, you could be a director, you could be a writer, you could be a distributor, you could do all of those things, and you probably will. So what I'm going to suggest to you is take a different route than many of the people in that industry are taking, and learn about all of those different parts so that then you can bring to a project a variety of perspectives in terms of making a good media production. So I think all of my life, I've lived outside of the box, the traditional box of jobs, security. And so when it came to writing ReFirement, it wasn't difficult for me to do because I had a whole lifetime of professional experience up to that point. When I was 55, I had a whole lifetime of professional experiences that told me that this was at least an alternative for me. It wasn't for everybody, but it was for me.
So what was that point around age 53 or 55 that again caught, because you were kind of living this, you were living this prior to that point, but what was it about kind of that time period in your life where you said, I want to write a book about this. I want to
Mhm.
continue what I'm doing now well into the future.
It was because a lot of my friends were involved
Mm.
in talking about retirement. So when you're out with your friends and they're talking about their retirement and they're talking about how they're going to structure their 401ks and how they're going to work with their pensions and all that kind of stuff, it got me to thinking, well, I hadn't been really thinking about retirement because I was sort of doing things that I like to do, and it wasn't even a thought in my mind, but they brought me to realize I should be thinking about this. And then as I got into it, I realized that I was entering a different stage in my life. I was entering a stage, maybe the third act of my life. And so then it got me reflecting about what does that mean? And can the traditional notions of retirement fit that those reflections that I was having about what I wanted to do with the third act in my life. So that's basically, it was my friends that were responsible for me writing ReFirement because they got me thinking about retirement when there was a time that I wasn't even thinking about it. So
what are your friends doing today?
I have a lot of different friends and they're all doing different things. The one thing that I think is common with my friends is that I think we've all made a commitment to try to stay healthy, active, and meaningful and relevant. So 4 things that I think we've all tried to do. And all of them in their own ways are trying to do that. Some are working with volunteer organizations after they've retired to basically implement some of their skills and what they've learned in their work, in their professional work careers. Some are still working part-time, not full-time, but part-time. Some are teaching. Some are some are traveling as doing educational travel and then sharing that with the group of us that I have a pretty wide network of social friends that share whatever they're involved in. So I think that those concepts, though, of staying active, healthy, looking for meaning, and being relevant and staying relevant, trying to stay relevant in our society. Those are the four things that all of my friends that I can think of are trying to live out.
Yeah. Now, did they come to that conclusion or find that new purpose in their life before they retired, or as they were retiring, or after they retired?
I think as they were retiring for some, and
Yep.
after they retired for some others. I don't think most of them were thinking about this before they retired. And what I've learned is it's not a bad idea to start thinking about it before you retire, because that way you can prepare. And what I'm advocating in my book and Refire Your Life, and also in the Longevity Revolution, it's better to prepare at a younger age for that, so you can develop different interests. So when it comes time to leaving a traditional job, you have other things that you've been doing for a while that you really enjoy, that you're really passionate about, that you like to do. And so the transition into this next stage can be an easier one than trying to start something all over at the age of 55 or 65. I'm not saying you can't do that, because you can. I know people that have done that, but it's easier to do it this other way by thinking earlier about what areas you want to pursue in your life besides the work, the professional work, or the work that you're doing.
But the interesting thing is what Reed and I have found in our research, and just in the clients that we interact with. We live in a just-in-time society.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really nothing in our society that prepares really anyone for retirement except for the financial side.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's kind of lulled into sleep that as long as they have the right 401k and the Social Security and all that other stuff, that you'll be it's spring break for seniors, it'll be great.
Right.
and all that. And what people find out after about 6 or 7 months into it is that they're bored.
Mm-hmm.
And they're watching a lot of TV,
Mm-hmm.
and they're putting on weight.
Right.
And all of a sudden, they're out to lunch a lot, and their bartender is their therapist.
Mm-hmm.
It's this whole idea of the work that you're doing, especially with longevity. That's the thing that we really feel can really break through and grab people. Are you finding the same thing?
Yes, and I think that yes, and when I was writing ReFirement, I took this book. Doing my research, I went out and I talked to a lot of people who were older than I was, people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, because I wanted to look for models of people that I could follow in terms of looking at this next stage in my life. I wanted to find people that were like me. Now, I didn't find a lot of people that were like me, but the ones that I found were incredibly valuable to me, and they helped me to sort of think about this in a different way. And what's interesting is that when you talk to an 85 or 90-year-old, for example, and they're talking to you about their life, they never talk about their 401k. They never talk about their about their golf game. They never talk about their sometimes they talk about their travel, but what they do talk about are their relationships, and the kind of relationships that they have, and how important it is to have relationships. And so I think I tried to emphasize that in my book, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, about intentional intergenerational relationships. But we also emphasize that in the Longevity Revolution in terms of how important it is to build networks of people. And I say, if you're 55, look for people who are 80, look for people who are 90 that can give you some guidance and give you some help. So that's I've seen people doing exactly what I think is an important thing to do, and that's take time to reflect on that. But then a lot of people reflect, but they don't act. I don't know whether you've seen that or not, but it's like,
Oh, yeah.
it's a
Yes.
big thing. We're all afraid of change. I mean, that's a common knowledge among sociologists and psychologists. We don't like to change, but in some ways, change is oftentimes imposed on us, and we're forced to change. So the more flexible we can become at younger ages, and the more easily adaptable we can become to change, the easier it's going to be later on to make changes that we're all going to make. And there are some changes that happen. There are physical changes. I mean, I'm not painting a rosy picture of aging here. I mean, we all know that it's not sometimes very much fun to get older in terms of your body, and no matter how you try to stay healthy, there are things that happen to you that you have no control over. So I just think the more prepared you are, earlier the better. The more prepared you are, the easier it is to adapt to things like a physical impairment that happens to you for the first time in your life, and it just scares the hell out of you. So these things make you think about and reflect about who you are, where you're going, what you want to do, and how you want to keep your life relevant, healthy, active, and meaningful.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Jim, about why it's important also for people to plan earlier as opposed to getting into retirement. And like Bob said, we see a lot of people who make the transition into retirement, think it's going to go smooth, and then once they realize it's not going smooth, then they may spend a year or two trying to figure out what to do in retirement. And if we can help people plan a little bit ahead of time, that not only makes the transition smoother,
Mm-hmm.
is what we've noticed, but also one of the things that happens, and research is showing this too, is although people will say, well, I'm going to retire at 62 or 65, they oftentimes retire many years earlier than that for a variety of reasons. They could be let go from their job. It could be health concerns of themselves, health concerns of family members. So there's oftentimes a lot of ways that people retire earlier than planned. So I think your point's a good one about planning earlier, because it'll make that transition a lot smoother.
And I just want to add, it's better to plan in calm than plan in
Yeah,
crisis. So,
yeah, that's a good point.
and so I think that the times when you have the opportunity and the gift of being able to prepare in calm and plan in calm is a better time to do it than when you're going through a crisis, regardless of what that crisis is. I don't think you do your best planning during crisis periods. I
Yeah,
haven't found that for myself, and I don't
yeah, I
think that's
think that
true for
the
others.
decision making is a little better under those circumstances. So in your books, Jim, I'm curious about how you decided. There's a lot of RE terms that come up with retirement. People are trying to replace the term retirement or
Mhm.
kind of bring a different light to it. And I noticed you settled on the terms in your books, refire and
Mhm.
refirement. So how did you kind of come to selecting those terms?
I saw some of those terms, but as you pointed out, when I was writing this, it was pretty early in the process, and so there weren't a lot of books around. And since that time, since 2001, I've seen many different terms used to describe this. But when I was doing my research, passing through fire has always been a symbol of transcending the human condition. There's a book called The Dictionary of Symbols, which I used, and it defines fire as connected to life, health, and spiritual energy. And in many theologies, fire is a symbol of victory over evil. And it really isn't a mistake that every time we have a celebration of a new year, how does it start? It starts with fireworks that symbolize a new beginning, a new time, a new start. And so refire seemed to me to be a much better word than redesigning your life, reinventing your life. So this seemed to me to be a much more energetic word, and it sort of subtly and subconsciously connects to a lot of symbolism that we've had throughout our lives that is very familiar to us and sort of could spark us, if you will, to not burden the analogy, but to spark us to be thinking about what we're going to be doing in a different and new way. So that's how I came up with ReFirement. And actually, I didn't come up with the word. I was in a discussion with somebody who was, again, older than I was, who talked about refiring his life. And I said, what? You mean retiring your life? And he says, no. I'm not intending on retiring my life, because retiring really means to go away from, and not to enter into. And so that sort of started me thinking about that word. And then I got more into it and did the research and found out that there was really a good justification for using the word refire your life as opposed to retiring your life. And one person pointed out to me as I was giving presentations on this back in the early 2000s that when he saw the word, he thought that he was going to, since he had been fired from his job once, he thought that I was writing a book in case you got fired again. So that was kind of a funny way to look at it. But he was the minority. There weren't a lot of people that thought about it that way. That's how I came up with it.
Okay. That's interesting. I've never heard that take on that word, but I like that it incorporates some symbolism and has some kind of meaning behind the word. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the recent book that you were a part of with the two financial advisors called Join the Longevity Revolution. I think I asked both John and Brad this question too, but how did the three of you guys kind of come together to collaborate on this book about longevity planning?
It was interesting because I had met Brad about a year, I think 2002, after I had read the book. I was invited to come to Duluth to a church to talk about how I could take the intergenerational work that I was doing and basically it was about the intergenerational work. And as we were talking, Brad was telling me about he was going through some changes about wanting to change his direction in his life. And he had read my book, ReFirement, A Boomer's Guide to Life After 50. And he said basically it helped change his life because he decided to go in a whole different direction, became a financial advisor, and the rest is sort of history with Brad. But driving back from Duluth, it occurred to me that, hey, there's an idea here that maybe there's a different market for the book and the concepts in the book, but translated for financial advisors. So I basically called him up and said, Brad, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to share what I've done. I've done a lot of research and traveled around and did a lot of work with this. And I think it would have some applicability for financial advisors. And that's how Brad and I began. And then as we got into this, we started looking around for other financial advisors that were thinking around the same areas. And we came across John's work because John was doing things more in the prevention area about trying to plan for those things that might happen to you that you weren't prepared for. And I thought, and both Brad and I thought this would be a great addition to the book, not just talking about the longevity revolution, but one of the important elements is how do you plan for unforeseen circumstances? And John had already done a lot of that research, so we invited John to join us in this effort, and that's how we came together as a group. And then we worked on writing different chapters and sharing the chapters and going through that. Then Brad's wife, who's a wonderful editor at the University of Minnesota Duluth in the Writing Center, took it on as the editor that edited our work and tried to put it into one voice.
So how did you come up with the title Join the Longevity Revolution? How did the three of you because sometimes chapters or titles for books can be a little bit hard to kind of come up with. I've been involved in a few books and it seems like you get different thoughts and different opinions. So how did you come up with it, and what's the significance of Join the Longevity Revolution?
Well, Brad actually brought the whole concept of longevity revolution because that was sort of a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a number of people were talking about longevity. Now, I had done work without calling it longevity in my prior works. I mean, I knew we were an aging population and the population was getting older, which meant people were living longer, but I hadn't coined the term longevity revolution in my own context. But Brad brought that to us and was able to share some of the early research on longevity that he had found that he was interested in. And as we were talking, we did toss around a whole bunch of titles. I think, if I recall correctly, it was my idea to say join the longevity revolution. You have to check with Brad and John if that's true, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And so the idea for that title was to make it active. Don't make it something like
Yep.
explore the longevity revolution or consider the longevity. To say join the longevity revolution means that you have to do something to become a part of this. And to
Yep.
do something, you have to be thinking about, why do I want to do this? What's involved in doing this? How do I benefit from this? What are the advantages that I can offer by doing this? So it became a much more active and involved process by saying join the longevity revolution. So that's how we came up with the title. And I learned a lot from this in terms of learning about some of the new research that was being done that I hadn't followed particularly, because it had been a while since I had written even the last revision of Refire Your Life. So I learned a lot in this process too about what was being done, and the idea of having financial advisors who are in direct contact with the basic target audience that we were looking at seemed to be a no-brainer in terms of being able to incorporate my work, their research, and their work together into something that hopefully would be useful to a financial advisor that was working with a client, be they in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s or 70s. So that was the idea, and that's how we came up with it.
So as you launched the book and got things going, and you got it out there in the public, what surprised you with the reaction to it?
Well, the original idea that we had was we wanted to focus on Raymond James as a financial institute, because both Brad and John were Raymond James financial advisors. So we thought this should be sort of a no-brainer to get it into Raymond James and have them. And they even had at that time, Brad had shown us that they had formed a longevity council within Raymond James that was looking at the issue of longevity. So I think what surprised me was how difficult it is to get a concept like this, even though you have two people who are very successful producers for Raymond James in terms of financial advising. You have a company that sort of posits itself as being on the cutting edge of financial advising thinking. And we're still trying to work our way through that process. Even though the book's been out for a couple of years now, it's still working its way through that process of trying to get a financial advising firm to adopt what we're talking about in the book, which is, for the first time, we presented how you create a holistic longevity plan and how a financial advisor can do that. Nobody had done that up until we did this in Join the Longevity Revolution. But it's not been easy, and we've been talking with a lot of different people, and we've gone out to different financial advising firms. It's just difficult in larger instances. And we didn't have the money, for example, to do a huge marketing campaign. That wasn't the idea that we came up with. We thought if we could do this and simply get one big financial advising firm to adopt it and promote it with their financial advisors, we would feel very satisfied with that work. And then we knew that if that was happening, then we might see commercials, for example, produced by Raymond James called Join the Longevity Revolution, or by some other financial firm that might want to contract with us to do something around our book. So that was the biggest surprise. It was just difficult. It's been difficult to get the book more widely known and more widely read than I thought it would be.
Exactly. And, I have a theory, and I've talked to read a number of people about it. And financial advisors tend to be transactional in the way they look at life.
Mm-hmm.
And many times their clients look at life from a relational lens.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, there can be a conflict. Is that something, how does that strike you?
Oh, I think that's a very accurate description. I think you're absolutely 100% correct. And that's something that I think we were hoping to make that bridge between transaction and relational in the book by saying transactional things are important for sure. You need to have a transactional analysis because some of the things are quantifiable and you can do them in a transactional way. But as you point out, and as I found out, and I think most people that have done research in this fund, the clients are more interested in the relational parts of these of this longevity than the transactional parts. But we're seeing we thought we could create the bridge and create more of a balance, but so far some of that's happened. We've been doing workshops with financial advisors on Zoom like this, and we're finding out once they see what's in the book and they see what they can do with their clients, they're understanding that they need to sort of adjust their approach to advising their clients also.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn it back to Reed now because he's been chomping at the bit there to get into the intergenerational
I've enjoyed hearing Jim talk about this, because Bob and I have both kind of worked with financial advisors, Jim. That's kind of where my focus is. One of the things that Bob and I have talked about is the work that we do helping people transition into retirement, and what you've written about for years really is part of this whole longevity planning. So it's not like it's two separate topics.
Right.
We focus a lot on maybe that retirement transition in the first few years, but setting that early story in retirement. Bob and I, talk about health and social connections and relationships and all the things that, you've been talking about. All of that kind of fits into this longevity kind of planning. And I've found kind of the same thing with you, that when I've worked with financial advisors, it just seems like getting this topic integrated into the type of planning that they do is taking a little bit longer than what all of us who've kind of been working in this space have realized. So
Right.
I think it's just, and that's part of the reason Bob and I wanted to do this show, was I think the more that these topics get put out in front of people, particularly the financial advice space, some of it might be on the employee benefits side where people can get some of this information too before they leave the workforce. So we're just trying to, again, provide ways for people to get that information. But the whole idea of longevity and retirement planning, there's kind of an overlap on a lot of those topics. And I'm sure you noticed that too as you started writing the book and talking with Brad and John about this whole topic. It's really kind of just an extension of this non-financial retirement planning that has a lot of overlap with these longevity topics. So.
I completely agree with that. And I think the more people like yourselves that are talking about this and raising awareness with financial advisors, the better chance there is that we're going to ultimately reach a tipping point where this information will become so valuable that they won't be able to do the financial advice without incorporating the things that we know are very important and integral to good, successful financial planning, and how that could be really tremendously improved if they incorporated some of these things and were advising their clients around them. So that's it's part of it is, I think, is breaking through some sort of professional boxes and silos that people put themselves in. And that's always difficult. And I said to Brad and John, probably right after we published the book, I said, this is going to be a slog. It's going to be a long slog. So we're all in it for the long run. And as long as we can be running. So we're going to keep doing it until we can't do it anymore. So that's the idea. Right.
Well, you mentioned that you were in the civil rights movement. The longevity movement is that too. I mean, it's that kind of compelling subject matter.
Right.
That's the thing. So tell us about your intergenerational work and how you're connecting the dots there.
Okay, so this is my passion. I mean, if you ask me what is my one core passion, my passion is, and I did this probably 35 years ago, I developed a 50-year work plan, and that was to take the next 50 years of my life and try to improve relationships between the generations. And the reason I came to this was I did a lot of community organizing in my work, even as a filmmaker. I was helping to organize communities. I did statewide organizing of a food and nutrition campaign in Minnesota, worked on a couple of statewide political campaigns in Minnesota. So I did a lot of organizing, but I always felt something was missing in that organizing that I wasn't quite able to put my finger on. I had been trained in the Peace Corps as being a direct action organizer, person that did the Alinsky type of organizing, where you stop things and you cause trouble and you try to get things going. So I was trained in all of these different aspects of being a good organizer. But again, I just felt something was missing that I wasn't able to put my finger on. And I sat down to lunch with somebody a number of years ago, probably 33 years ago. And we were talking and they said, here's a book that I just finished reading, and it's called Generations. It's a book written by two authors that have the theory that if you look at American history, and I have a master's degree in history, so I'm sort of a little partial historian besides my PhD in sociology and education. But as an historian, they say that America has had 4 living generations that literally repeat themselves. So if you want to find a generation like your own, you go back 99 years from your birthday, and you'll find a description of a generation that resembles the generation that you are living in. And I thought that was interesting. I had never seen a take on American history that way. And it got me thinking about, well, if that's true, and they identified the years of, the current generations, the 4 living generations that they identified. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe if I took those designations and I went out and did focus groups or did dialogues, I could bring people together and identify them by their generation as opposed to their race, their culture, their sex, their gender, but look at it from a generational point of view. And what I found out in doing that is I ended up writing 3 books on intergenerational dialogue and action. And I've worked in companies and corporations. I've worked in churches. I've worked in community organizations. I've worked in government to try to implement the fact that we have now in the United States 6 living generations that are all different from each other. Yes, they share certain things, and there are people that are on the cusp of one generation or another, but literally these generations are unique. And unless you recognize the uniqueness of those generations, you tend to miss an important part of what they bring to the table. So my idea was to recognize the uniqueness of each of the generations we have, and then ask those generations to work together to try to solve common problems that we all have. And I've been doing that now for over 33 years, and I've done it all over the country. I've done it in different parts of the world. I've done it in every racial group in the United States, where I was the only white person in a group of African Americans, of Native Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans. And so the idea here is that it's important to recognize the importance of relating to different generations. Now, we all have that in our families, so we know that concept. We know that we're different from our parents. We know that we're different from some of our younger nieces and nephews, but to see that as an intentional aspect helps you to see what you get from those different relationships. And I always point out, if you want to talk about feeling younger, well, relate to somebody who's older. You'll always be younger than they are. So I have a lot of friends who are in their 80s and 90s right now. I have a number of friends, I would say a number of friends that are in that age group. And I relate to them every week. That I try to find a way to connect with them and talk about what's going on in their lives. And I have a lot of relationships with people that are younger, from the 2-3 generations that are younger than me. And I try to intentionally every week try to relate to at least 4 or 5 of those 6 generations every week. And that helps me tremendously in terms of my outlook and my perspective on what's happening in the country, what's happening to me personally. Sometimes they're members of my family, sometimes they're not. I try to always go out and find other relationships if I'm searching for other relationships with people that are either younger than me or older than me. And doing that has really helped in my approach to longevity. It certainly energized me by dealing with the younger generations, and it's also given me wisdom and experience by dealing with generations that are older than me. And that's why I think it's a foundational piece of any plan that you have for refiring your life, for reinventing your life, or joining the longevity revolution. That's why I was really adamant about having that chapter in the book about the importance of intentional intergenerational relationships. We're always involved in intergenerational relationships. We're involved, but I'm saying be intentional about it, and be intentional to the fact that you're trying to have and have them understand where you're coming from, the other generations. But I also found in doing my dialogue work that you could bring a number of people together, be they black and white, single or married, renters or homeowners, together in a dialogue. And within minutes, if you put them into their generational groups, they will find things that they have in common because they're members of a generation that supersede all of that. Now, all of our diversity training in business has been focused on differences. And what I'm suggesting is, why don't we start on things that people share in common as opposed to starting with differences? I think you have a better chance of reaching some common agreements if you start with things that are in common, as opposed to saying differences are important and now we're going to struggle to overcome the differences, which is the way most of our diversity training and that whole area works. It focuses on differences as opposed to commonality. So that's why I think the generational and intergenerational perspective is important in this longevity work. Long answer to your question, but that's because it's my passion.
And that's exactly the reason why I asked it.
Thanks. No, I just think it's very important, and I think I've been able to be able to communicate that in different ways, both in my books that I've written, but I also think in this book for financial advisors. When we were doing our workshops with financial advisors on the longevity revolution, people were always intrigued with that part of the workshop that I basically did on why it's important to think and act in an intentional intergenerational way as you get older, regardless of what age that starts from.
Considering the fact that 50% of the financial advisors today are 50 plus, that's a very good observation.
Right, and I think that it's an easy one to understand because we all experience that in our own families. We're all experiencing a multi-generational approach in our own families. So it shouldn't be that difficult to extrapolate that and take that into applying that to the rest of our world, right? I mean, to the and so it's just an important part. It's an important part of who I am. It's part of my core value system, or what we would describe in the longevity revolution as a prescriptive value, something that is you really need to have that in order to move forward and to get the most out of your journey in the longevity revolution.
Absolutely.
Jim, take some of this intergenerational guidance and talk about from a corporate perspective, because that's one of the things Bob and I have talked about too. And in the corporate world now, or different organizations, because of longevity, the workforce is going to be, from age 20 all the way up to age 80, or maybe even 90 here in the future. And so the challenge, I think, for some companies is not only having people of multiple generations, but then getting them to work together like you're talking about. So maybe talk about from an organizational perspective some of the guidance that you've given to companies.
Right. I remember reading, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but Fortune magazine, very early in this period, so it must have been 25 or 30 years ago, had the cover of Fortune magazine, and it was boomers versus busters. And it was showing how much money corporations lost because of their inability to do effective communication between generations in the workplace. Well, I happened to be at a party one night with the vice president of human resources for corporate 3M. And I raised this with him. I mean, I said, here's this Fortune magazine article. I'll get it to you. I'm going to send it to you by mail at that point. It wasn't by email, but by mail. And so I sent it to him and he called me in and we had this meeting. And I ended up working at 3M for probably 2.5 years with some of the companies at 3M to talk about doing intergenerational dialogues in the company itself, bringing the generations in the company together. And one of the things that I told them was that you can't do an intergenerational dialogue in the company unless you bring the retirees from that company into that dialogue, because they're the people that created much of the corporate culture that's there, and they're relying on the existence of a good, healthy, and vibrant corporate culture to keep their pensions and everything in existence. So it was an interesting thought at that time for this person to, and so we ended up bringing some retirees into those dialogues so that they could give their perspective. But I think the big issue is communication within a company, that unless you understand that. I did a dialogue, for example, in South Minneapolis. This isn't a corporate dialogue, but the dialogue was around all we did was we spent a whole day on a Saturday talking about the word respect. And we had 5 generations there in that group, and they represented the diversity of South Minneapolis, trust me, in terms of age, in terms of race, in terms of occupations, et cetera, et cetera. And we found out that one generation's idea, and when they said the word respect, it meant something entirely different than another generation concept of what respect was. So take that just transfer that into the corporate world. If people are writing memos, for example, or writing directives or writing plans, and they're not understanding that there is a communication that is different for one generation, different than the other, then you're certainly losing times in terms of the translation of making sure you get that right. But if you started with the idea that you tried to understand that there were generational differences in the workplace and how you work in the work, you become a much better manager, for example. I did a whole chart, for example, on managing different generations and the things you looked for in terms of managing generations in the workplace. And this was, I think, helpful for people. I wrote a little booklet called Generations in the Workplace that showed each of the generations at that point that were in the workplace, and showed how they had developed their core values by pointing out all of the life events that they lived through as a generation. So yes, there are all kinds of differences that within a generation. I'm not going to deny any of that, but I do think that companies that recognize the importance of the uniqueness of generations and how they have to be treated in a different way. For example, the millennial generation, which is now sort of working its way into upper management in the workplace, they were the generation that were the most tested generation in American history. They were tested from the time they were 4 years old. They've been continually tested. So I made the proposition a number of years ago that this is a generation that had the greatest fear of failure, because all the testing that they had done. So they were less innovative. They were less creative because they didn't want to do that, because they were afraid that they would fail. And so one of the things that a good manager does then is create an atmosphere where you don't promote failure, but you promote an atmosphere where you know failure is going to happen. And the point here is not to deny it, but to accept it, and then help people understand why they failed and how to get better at what they're doing and what they're doing with their jobs. So there's the number of things that I've seen in the workplace. I've seen the ability of recruiting, for example, that's changed now. You see recruiting aspects have changed. There are some people are recognizing this, and there's a whole wealth of research now that didn't exist 30 years ago. Trust me. The word intergenerational, by the way, was not in internet dictionaries when I first started this work. You could not find the word intergenerational. And I used to write to Microsoft, and I would say to I'd write to Bill Gates directly, and I'd say, please put the word intergenerational in your dictionary that you're offering on the internet. And now, if you go in and look at the word intergenerational, there are tens of thousands of references to intergenerational. Not that I was responsible for that, but the fact is that that concept and word did not exist when I started this work 35 years ago.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, and longevity, I think, again, to tie longevity into that is bringing terms like intergenerational into our dictionaries. So Jim, we're gonna, I think, leave it there. We're kind of at the top of our time now. Are there any additional points or anything you'd like to discuss that we didn't get a chance to touch on? Any points for the audience that you'd like to share?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that I had in the book in Refire Your Life that I think are important things. One is that as you begin to think about this new gift of longevity, this gift of aging, look at what really spirits you and what really dulls you in your life. It was an interesting exercise for me, because when I finally wrote that chart out and wrote down what spirits me and what dulls me, the first time, there were a lot more things that dulled me than spirited me. So it told me that I had to make some changes in my life. That was an important realization. I think getting your groove back, it was an important piece. And I mentioned humor, for example, and how important humor is as we develop, as we age. And not be so dour in our in our aging, but to have humor, and how important that is, even from a health perspective, to developing good endorphins. You develop better endorphins, healthy endorphins, when you laugh than when you're not laughing. So I think humor is an important piece that you want to make sure you intentionally add to your longevity plan. I think becoming an elder in training was an important piece in that, and that relates back to the intergenerational piece. But to think of yourself not as an elder, because sometimes people don't want to think of themselves as an elder. So I said, okay, think of yourself as an elder in training. And that means that you're learning things as you're becoming an elder, that you're sharing with others. And I think it's time that and I think this is happening, that we really retire the word retirement. I think it's time just to get rid of that word and develop a whole new paradigm for how we look at things, and look at what the passions are in your life, to identify what those passions are, and how you can find we call it the ikigai in the book Longevity Revolution. That's you're finding your purpose in life. And once you find that, or purposes in your life, it doesn't have to be just a purpose, but once you find those things, it sort of makes the whole issue, you're focused then on what the purpose is. You're focused in on finding happiness. You're focused on things like humor. You're not focused on the negative sides of aging as much as you are on the positive sides, because now you're focusing on what spirits you, and you're not focusing on the things that dull you. So if you do that and sort of enter that into your prescription for joining the longevity revolution, I think you have a much better chance of doing pretty well as you age, and as you become, as I said at the very beginning, as you become more healthy, more active, more meaningful, and as you become more relevant and stay relevant in the society that we live in. So if you do all of those things, I think you have a good shot at having a successful longevity. So join the longevity revolution and join it on those terms.
Perfect way to close that out. Jim, I'm going to pull up your contact information here so we can share that with viewers. So Jim's book, Refire Your Life, is in the middle on the bottom, and then the book that we were talking about, Join the Longevity Revolution, is on the top. Again, Jim's company is Points of View Inc. His website is pointsofviewinc.com, and there's the books that he's written. Jim's email is included on here, and his phone number if anybody would like to contact him. Jim, thanks a lot for joining us today. And thanks for everybody for watching. We'll see you next time when we continue exploring retirement and longevity planning beyond the numbers.
Thank you all very much. I appreciated it.